last year has been a lot of uncertainty with the economy, a lot of changes with the budget.
Yep.
I guess you probably got your finger on the pulse more than anyone in terms of what the future looks like. So could you give us a little snapshot? So I'm here with Neil Carberry, who's the CEO of the REC. Thanks for joining me today, Neil. I just thought it'd be really useful to give the audience a little bit of an understanding of what we're facing in 2025 when it comes to the labour market.
So let's have a look at the labour market broadly over the last couple of years to start with. A lot of political uncertainty, basically running from the time of the Brexit referendum on through the upheaval of the pandemic. And it's really worth thinking about the last couple of years, which have been broadly pretty weak in terms of labour market demand. In fact, the weakest 2 consecutive years we've seen in our data, which goes back to 97. Of thinking about that as the long wavelength of the pandemic. So we had 2020 where nobody did anything, coming into late 21, 22, where suddenly there was this scrabble for resources amongst businesses desperately trying to offset the stuff they hadn't done in 2020 and worried about shortages. And then we get into 23, demand, we had all sorts of effects of the price shock in terms of money was no longer free as it had been basically from 2007 to 2022. That had a big impact on clients who were hiring permanently, but also for those hiring in temporary, it actually makes temporary hiring more expensive to supply for agencies. So firms were picking and choosing what they were doing a lot more. So you had that kind of sort of long bear run, abetted by political uncertainty. But there's still a bit of political uncertainty about it, but actually it's mostly international. You know, I think in the UK, the first thing to say is, you know, Labour won the election. They've got a plan. The budget wasn't great news for business, particularly around things like NI. We'll have to wait and see whether they're coming back for any more. But what we do have is certainty. The nature of the British political system is Keir Starmer is going to be Prime Minister for 5 years. This government has a majority big enough that it probably won't even lose a vote in the House of Commons in that 5 years. So there's certainty there. By comparison with, say, France, Germany, to a certain extent the US, that is a relatively stronger position. The UK is back internationally as having spent a few years in the doghouse as an investment destination. There's lots of work to do to build on that. So I think broadly, my first kind of bit of positive news is actually the UK looks pretty stable as a place to invest. That feels positive. The city and investors, however much you didn't like the NI rise in the budget, the Chancellor's decision was businesses would wear the NI rise and pass it on to employees through the next couple of pay rounds, and we won't do the stuff that really hits the investors. If you think about some of the potential changes, some of the potential higher rates of CGT that were proposed, the carried interest base, the city looks at the budget rather differently to the average employer, and they're a bit more positive. So there's some underlying stuff there. Unemployment's still low, and importantly, domestically, the labour force, the labour supply is quite tight. So if I think about going forward, cyclically we're expecting a pickup anyway because the economy runs on cycles, but actually the underpinning pieces of the economy are quite strong. If you look at things like new mortgage data, if you look at, for instance, UK household balance sheets are in balance. The households have got as much equity as they've got debt. So I know there's been a big kind of flurry of response to the budget, and there are challenges there. I think there's been a bit of an over-response. I think potentially the middle of the year looks quite positive, and you start to see some more hiring happening. If we lock that into kind of professional hiring, things like finance and accountancy, that was maybe a bit stronger, a bit longer than other bits of the economy, maybe stronger into late 23, maybe just the beginning of 24. We expect that to come back with the economy, especially as companies manage more complex balance sheets, manage some very challenging cost situations. And one of the things I say to all businesses right now is, hang on, let's just step back, put the bags down. We're stepping away from a couple of things. We're stepping away from that long wavelength of the pandemic, but we're also stepping away from a period, and CFOs will understand this, where money was basically free.
Yeah.
And that period of 2007 to 2022, that's the outlier. You know, people who've been CFOs, been in finance for a long time, know that cost of capital is just returning to what it always was. And I think in terms of relations with boards, relations with chief execs, CFOs, FDs are going to need to re-educate people with that, and with that new world. You see some of that starting to happen in the way that you see finance roles evolving. Certainly a lot more push. You'd know more about this than I would in terms of CFOs, FDs as commercial leaders in the business.
That's right, yeah.
It seems to be a big trend.
Absolutely.